So, Halqifibrax is banned, and other adjustments to the ban list have happened, but mostly Halqifibrax is banned. So, the deck vampires had to be adjusted quite a little bit. Now, keep in mind, Halqifibrax wasn't like the main bit of how you play vampires, but it was a very strong extender that helped make end boards kind of more insane than they could be regularly. But in virtue of being able to take out the Halq engine, because Halq is banned and facilitated most of the synchro lines that we played in the previous deck list that y'all might have watched or not, then we have more room to play more cards in the extra deck, theoretically. So theoretically you can still play some synchro monsters, like I used to play Baron de Fleur, I used to play Borreload Savage Dragon, but those were consistently being made off of Halq lines, and you could still theoretically make those level synchros using Unizombie, and you have level modulation potential with Vampire's Desire and just swarming in general. So like synchro monsters like Shooting Riser, Chaos Ruler, Borreload Savage, Baron de Fleur, all those are on the table potentially, and when we get it in the future, Mortal Dragon, there's no like consistent lines to say, okay, every time I get this hand, I will always rely on being able to make this synchro that I will always want to reliably make, now the deck itself. So how does the deck itself work? So the whole idea is that you just have a bunch of cards that are small that let you bring out big, not so small cards that you eventually end up leading into Beatrice so that you could mill on your turn, Necroworld Banshee, as well as your opponent's turn, the Doom King Ballardrock by the standby phase, so you could then activate Zombie World using Necroworld Banshee's effect, so you could play Zombie World and allow you to summon the Ballardrock and respond to all zombie monsters' effects to either negate them or banish a monster on the field or graveyards non-targetably. And since Zombie World makes all your opponent's monsters zombie monsters, you do the thing. So it's fantastic. And it's cool. And so like the way that combo works is we have Vampire Ghost, which is the card that made vampires more interesting to get. That's a new card that we got alongside all the bread and stuff, but that stuff is, everyone's played that, so you got to play the cool new thing. And basically the way it works is Vampire Ghost plus any vampire name, whether it's a monster or not, it will lead you to a guaranteed Beatrice setup. Of course, read the fine print as long as your opponent doesn't disrupt it successfully. The idea is, let's say if you have a Vampire Ghost and a Vampire Retainer, for example, right? So the idea is you use Vampire Ghost effect so that you could normal summon it, allowing you to then send to the graveyard the Retainer, which will then allow you to use Ghost effect to add a level 5 or higher Vampire monster, and then send a level 2 or lower Vampire monster to the graveyard. So what you do, traditionally, is you add the Grace, and then you send to the graveyard the Familiar. And what that lets you do is then use Familiar's effect to send to the graveyard the Grace from your hand to special summon from the graveyard to Familiar, and on special summon will allow you to add a Vampire monster from deck to hand, your target typically being the Shadow Vampire. And what you do then is you've already used your normal summon, but Vampire Ghost has a nice graveyard effect where you could banish it during the main phase of either player's turn so that you could normal summon a vampire monster in addition to your regular normal summon. So what you do to get the Vampire Ghost in the graveyard at that point is you link it as well as the Vampire Familiar off into Vampire Sucker. That means now you have Vampire Ghost in the graveyard, so you banish the Vampire Ghost so you can now summon the Shadow Vampire. Now you have to do so by tributing the Vampire Sucker, but that's completely fine because then you activate Shadow Vampire's effect to special summon from the deck, the Scarlet Scourge. Scarlet Scourge on summon will allow you to special summon a vampire from your graveyard. Now, because a level 5 or higher zombie monster special summoned onto the field by the effect of a zombie monster, that being the Scourge being summoned by the effect of the Shadow Vampire, you could trigger Grace's effect to special summon itself from the graveyard by paying 2,000 life points. So what you do is you activate Grace's effect first to special summon itself, and Chain Link 2, you activate Scourge's effect to special summon Vampire Sucker from the graveyard, and that'll allow you to end that whole funny chain link by summoning Vampire Sucker back on the field, and then afterwards Vampire Grace will be summoned onto the field from the graveyard, triggering the Vampire Sucker's effect to allow you to draw a card since the monster was summoned from the graveyard. So then you have 2 level 6s, so you overlay the 2 level 6s, Grace and Scourge, into Beatrice, and then on your turn you go ahead and send either Necroworld Banshee or Ballardrock, and on the opponent's turn, by their standby phase, you send the other. Back in the Halqi days, I was playing Glow Bloom just because you could also turbo out Glow Bloom by summoning it off of Christian Halqifibrax, and then if you had Zombie World on the field, you could just link it off into Link Karibo to be able to have full Zombie World combo there, but that's no longer a luxury now, and there's some cool plays you could make with having Glow Bloom so that you could wait and hold your Beatrice during your opponent's turn and not use it immediately in the standby phase and kind of dodge Called by the Grave as well, but it's just an additional brick that just ends up kind of doing more harm in your deck than good when you don't have the same ceiling as you used to. So I just chose to take it out personally. And now, like, what benefit the Vampire package adds to the whole Zombie World package, since there are, other ways that you can play Zombie World. Of course, you can play it in Eldritch. You can play it in, like, Brandon Eldritch, for example, and there's, like, a good amount of consistency there. But the way this benefits is that you have a searchable counter trap, so Retainer lets you special summon it by sending a Vampire card from your hand or face up field to the graveyard, so that you can go ahead and search a Vampire spell trap. So sometimes you use that to search Vampire's Domain, which gives you another additional normal summon set, another additional normal summon of a Vampire monster, in addition to your regular normal summon set. So you could stack that along with the Ghost to get potentially 3 normal summons that turn. And sometimes you do need that to get some crazy combo lines going. And otherwise, you could search for Vampire's Desire, which allows you to either target any of your face-up monsters on your field, so you could send a Vampire monster from your deck to the graveyard to make that targeted face-up monster on your field the same level as that monster. Which could be nice for level manipulation plays. Most importantly, to set up your graveyard with Vampire monsters that you want to then special summon and get more effects with, or something like a Grace that you want to special summon off of the Scorch, so you can then go into your Beatrice setup. And it has a second effect, so you can choose one of the 2 effects. The second one being you could target any of your monsters on your field and send them to the graveyard by special summoning one of your Vampire monsters in the graveyard. So it adds a lot of comeback potential as well, like being able to go ahead and on your follow-up turn summon back a Scourge by sending one of your monsters to the graveyard to then special summon Grace from the graveyard using Scourge's effect to then summon a Sheridan and put some more disruption on your opponent and potentially go into like a Zeus afterwards. So it's funny. So the final card that we play that we search off of Vampire Retainer is the Vampire Domination, which is a counter trap that lets you basically negate either spell trap or monster effect on activation as long as you control a vampire monster. So that could be just having Vampire Ghost, that could be just having Vampire Sucker, that could be just having any little vampire. So it's an omni negate that allows you to then put a lot more pressure on your opponent on top of like what Baller Drop and Zombie World does in terms of potentially floodgating certain strategies, as well as just like being able to be a disruptive force. So you could go ahead and negate a Harvest Feather Duster, a Lightning Storm. You could negate anything like a Call by the Grave trying to banish the Doom King Baller Drop. So it puts a little bit of added protection that the deck kind of needs to be able to do its full combo line on top of like just making sure that you get Doom King Baller Rock onto the field. And also, you lose 1 billion life points doing all your plays, by the way. So if you do your best combos, you usually have like 1,500 life points left. So the nice thing is Domination allows you to heal some life points if you happen to negate a monster specifically. You gain life points equal to the attack of the monster you negated and destroyed. So that could be nice. Domain's another way you could heal life points, but that's not as reliable since that requires you to specifically deal battle damage with vampire monsters. So don't rely on that, but it's possible. So that's the whole idea of it. Usually, like, there are other ways to make your Beatrice combo without Ghost. The thing is, those are typically 3 to 4 card combos. Like, the only way to do an efficient Beatrice combo line with what we have right now is Vampire Ghost and any vampire name. And again, that level of flexibility is nice, but again, you also don't always have access to Vampire Ghost, or by the time you do have access to it, you just don't have either the normal summons or the search potential to do all the plays that you want to do. So unfortunately, if you don't have Vampire Ghost, a lot of times you're relegated into having some awkward 3 to 4 card combo lines instead. And of course, if you don't happen to have the cards that you need to make an actual playable combo line, then when in doubt, Dippy out. Yeah, use you to Zombie to send Familiar to the graveyard or rotate it to the graveyard, send a Vampire card from your hand to the graveyard, and now you have 2 monsters on the field, Verte to Dippy. That's competent, right? And then you just try to amass resources doing that. Now, unfortunately, the fact that we only have so many copies of Vampire Ghost, you could play cards like Small World, for example, to increase consistency, and Effect Veiler could be a bridge to be able to access something like a Vampire Ghost. So, of course, that can make you go -1 on top of the fact that you already have a cost for using Vampire Ghost effect. So that could be a little detrimental, on top of the fact that, it's very normal summon reliant and very disruptible, and I also specifically built my deck so that we could also just have more disruption on the opponent, because going second, if your opponent has any bit of an established board, this deck just really crumbles very easily. It's really a going first and just die trying type of deck. And so you want to like go first and have as much answer disruption as possible. But if you have to go second, which might happen at least 50% of the time, you want to make sure that you at least stop your opponent from playing the game. So we play hand traps galore as well. We have to find a kind of balance so that we never run into situations where, for example, we have Vampire Ghost but no other vampire name, and that's why we play something like Pot of Prosperity, so that it could be another potential consistency card. And we do play a lot of high-level monsters as well that could be potential bricks, and that's there have been times where I've really wanted to take out Shadow Vampire specifically, but honestly, I just feel like the level of the high roll that the Shadow Vampire adds to your combo by being able to bring back a Vampire Sucker and give you a draw while giving you more link material in the process of that whole combo line just makes it so essential. And otherwise you're just ending on Beatrice and it just feels so mid. You may as well just not. You may as well just play Drytrons or Virtual World and just add a small little Zombie World Doom King package. So that in this way I feel like it makes it a little more worthwhile, even if it's adds that added brick potential. So you can play vampires without Zombie World and Doom King Baller Drag, but to me, with what we have specifically, I just feel like it has a higher ceiling and it's just more fun to play, but it also is very disruptible as well. Unfortunately, Zombie Vampire isn't very useful here because we don't really play any level 8s besides Doom King Baller Drag, and Zombie Vampire is meant to facilitate getting access to Doom King Baller Drag. So if we already have it on the field, it's kind of a pointless card. And while the mill and special summon effect could be really nice, I think it's just like too much cope to actually intend to summon it in a practical fashion. You can, again, if you play like more stealers like Sheridan and Fascinator and cards like Crackdown, it could be more viable, as well as like another level 8 such as Vavode. But I think Vavode is just already adding too many bricks while not having enough of justification to play it. It has a good effect, but not worthwhile, even if it's potentially easily summonable with things like Shadow Vampire. So that's kind of like the rationale of the way I built the deck. And of course we play Denier because you can summon it as a free body either on the same turn with Fusion Destiny or the following turn if you use Verte instead. And that could be just like link climbing material that you use with like IP or even on your turn for the OTK to make something like an Appaloosa or Access Code Tucker. So that's the whole idea behind that. Of course, with Halq Dedge, and that unfortunately makes Unizombie a little bit less of a high ceiling type of play. So Unizombie is still a very useful card because it lets you mill any zombie monster, which is really nice. And the level modulation, again, if you're playing Sinkers especially, can be kind of really goated for certain plays. But the problem with like Unizombie is it's not a vampire name, so you could mill any of your vampire cards using Unizombie, but you're still going to have another vampire name in your hand or on face up in your field that could be sent to the graveyard so that you could then special summon your Retainer and your Familiar specifically. So Unizombie is still strong, but usually it takes 3 to 4 card combos to really get the value that you want from Unizombie, which is okay when those 3 to 4 card combos included your typical Baller Drag Zombie World end board plus Halq plus Borreload Savage plus follow Baron Deflare. Now, unfortunately, we don't have that, so Unizombie is still a valuable starter, but again, having to rely on 3 to 4 card combos versus something like Ghost, which is a 2-card combo as long as you have it, as well as any vampire name, makes it slightly less ideal when you do have it in hand and it's your only way of starting the duel. So that's pretty much why I like just kind of rely a little bit less on the like synchro lines, and that's also why I don't play Solitaire as well. Not to mention the fact that that's also more normal summons that we don't want to have to play too many normal summons, and that's also just like another target for something like an Ash Blossom that puts us in a more detrimental situation. So that's my rationale there. So unfortunately, since we took out the high ceiling of Halq and just like the backup plan that Halq was in general, because like Halq was really nice. I know this is just like me simping on Halq at this point rather than doing a deck profile. So instead we opt to play the Dippy package, and it's like, oh my god, another Dippy deck. Yeah, I know it sucks, but I have to be honest, I truly think this deck really needs to play Fusion Destiny package along with Destiny Hero, Destroyer, Phoenix Enforcer, just because even though the engine has been nerfed both in its ability to be consistent for the initial blowoutness of it as well as like for its follow-up now that we don't have Celestial, I just feel like there's so many things that disrupt vampires, and if you're 1 cross-up designator and 2 Called by the Graves aren't enough to stop the plethora of hand traps that your opponents are going to be throwing on your Ghost normal summon play, then you're going to have a bad time, because usually once like Ghost or Familiar or Retainer are disrupted, then you kind of have nothing else to do besides just spam the board with monsters. So you may as well do something else with those monsters, which is go into Verte and then summon Destiny, Tyro, Destroyer, Phoenix, Enforcer. You could also summon IP Masquerena, which could lead to some plays, but again, usually at most that leads to Nightmare Unicorn Spin, which could leave some to be desired. So at least with Dippy, you have at least a recursive monster that you could like put some pressure on your opponent while you try to amass your resources to go for a follow-up play. So on top of that, I also added just more XC, so I put back the Sheridan for some follow-up plays, which is really nice to have because your typical Beatrice setup leaves you having Scourge as well as the Grace in the graveyard. So then once in your follow-up turn, if you use a Vampire's Desire on turn 3, for example, you could target any of your monsters that would be able to be sent to the graveyard. So you could then summon back the Scourge from the graveyard, which would then summon back the Vampire's Grace to the graveyard. So you could then go ahead and summon Sheridan and then put pressure on your opponent there as well. You only need one level 6 if you use something like a Vampire Fascinator or even Scarlet Scourge's effect to steal an opponent's monster. I don't play Fascinator personally just because the zombie lock is a little detrimental and there aren't really any good payoff extra deck monsters that are zombie only that would make the zombie restriction work well with the steal. That's why I just don't play it, but it's a card that you can play as well. And since we are actively trying to end on Beatrice for our main combo, I decided to just play Gaia into Zeus, because then after you use your Beatrice on both your turn and your opponent's turn, your opponent focuses on trying to deal with your Baller Drock and your zombie world. If you just happen to have Beatrice left over, then you just go ahead, rank up into Gaia Charger, and then you have Zeus, and then at least that's just another thing that your opponent has to deal with alongside your recursive Doom King Baller Drock and Zombie World. So that's pretty much the main additions that I added to the deck. The idea of the extra deck is the Karibo is there because sometimes you have to normal summon Familiar, and getting into the graveyard might allow you to get combo. And the way we do that is through Link Karibo, basically. So that's the whole idea with that. And there are certain combo lines, 3 to 4 card combo lines, where that could actually be more than just cope. So keep that in mind. We also play the Vedred Savior. It's not very essential, but it's a cool going second card where if you're like missing a certain piece that you need in the graveyard, you could use 2 zombie monsters to go into Vedred Savior, attack your opponent, and during damage calculation, you could send any zombie monsters from your deck to graveyard for cost to reduce the monster that you're attacking into's attack by 200. So even if they negate this effect, you could still successfully go ahead and send any zombie monster to graveyard because it's for cost. So it could be a way of getting that Doom King Baller Drock to the graveyard if that's your missing piece, or even getting a Vampire Starter in the graveyard if that's what you choose. So it doesn't come up often and it is replaceable, but it is a nice card to have. IP Masquerena, just because the amount of flooding that we do onto the board is insane, that once we do our high roll boards, we may as well make something of it. So we usually end on Beatrice and either going into IP or Verte Anaconda. If I don't have the ability to go into IP without thinking off like the Beatrice specifically, and I still need it to mill on the following turn, then I'll just go Verte instead. But if I can keep Beatrice, and if going into IP Masquerena doesn't turn off any like domination plays, like if I take out my only 2 vampire monsters on the field to make IP Masquerena, then I'll just go Verte instead. But if I can keep domination live, or if I just didn't have access to it in general, then I'll just go IP Masquerena, end it with IP and Beatrice, and then on the opponent's standby phase, when I use Beatrice to send Baller Drock to the graveyard and then activate Zombie World using Banshee's effect, I can then summon Baller Drock during their standby phase. And since a level 5 or higher a zombie monster was summoned using a zombie monster's effect, since Baller Drock is basically summoned by a zombie monster's effect, even if it's his own, you can then trigger Vampire Grace's effect to pay 2,000 life points to special summon it from the graveyard. That's another potential link material while also keeping Vampire Domination live if we do have it. So it's a nice way of being able to like make crazy monsters on your opponent's turn, either Nightmare Unicorn for a spin, making Appaloosa with more resources than if you made it on your turn, just because you get the 2 extra bodies with Grace and Baller Drock. Or you could even play something like an Underworld Goddess if you do have room for that, and that's another valid play line to be able to disrupt your opponent during their turn and just have more interaction with them. I play Dark just because it's really good and it's just nice to be able to steal your opponent's cards from the graveyard and use them for link climbing. I think it comes up often enough. And then the last one, it's a bit janky, but honestly, I think it's janky enough to be Corp, and that's a Barricade Board Blocker. There'll be times where you just draw either Banshee or Doom King Baller Drock, and you have your full Beatrice combo, but you can't send either Baller Drock or Banshee to the graveyard because they're stuck in your hand. What do? You cry. Or instead of linking off into IP Masquerena or Verte Anaconda, like a normal human being, you'll just link off into Barricade Board Blocker, and literally all it does is discard a card. And theoretically, you could add a field spell or continue spell from the graveyard to the hand at the turn that you use this effect. Of course, our only field spell being Zombie World, that's not going to happen, but we could do it to add back Domain, theoretically, if we use that instead. So that doesn't come off often, but the whole point is just to be able to go ahead and discard one of your bricks that you need to get into the graveyard. Another way to do that is, of course, using Unizombie, but you won't always have access to Unizombie or won't be able to normal summon at the very least. So that way, at least we have an extra deck option to always be able to do that in case we do have that brick. And Barricade for Blocker kind of crack because it also protects your field spells, or it protects face of field spells. They cannot be destroyed by an opponent's card effect, so that Farbe's Underduster can no longer pop the Zombie World. It's kind of cracked. So it actually kind of comes up, but really it's more of just a way to be able to get rid of your Balrog or from the hand and get it and play the way you want it. It can also be used to get back your Zombie World once it's sent to the graveyard, but of course it only gets added to the hand in the end phase of the turn you activate Barricade for Blocker's effect to this card. So it's slow, but it is an option, so something to consider. So that's the deck. It's honestly, the deck is fun, but I hate it so much because like you gave us this and then you gave us Brendan, and we already had shit like freaking Sword Soul and Halqifibrax existed for months, and you give us a 2-card starter. Bro, where's our 1-card starter? Give us a 1-card starter, and then give us 5 more of that, and then give us a boss monster that lets us like banish 10 monsters from your opponent's hand and then half their life points by 8,000, and then we're talking, okay? Until then, it's going to be a fun rogue deck. Nothing crazy. I would say Brendan Eldritch is still, to me, the best way of playing Zombie World in Master Duel right now, but this is the most fun way.